My name is Harold Bennett, and for 31 years I decided which people went home and which people never did. I wore the robe, I held the gavel. I told myself I was careful. Then 3 days after my 78th birthday, a package showed up on my porch with no return address, and inside was a single cassette tape. My full name was written across the front in blue ink, Judge Harold M. Bennett. I did not recognize the handwriting. And I want you to understand something before I go any further. I had not seen a cassette tape in 20 years. I did not even own a machine that could play one. But my hands started shaking the moment I touched it, because somewhere deep down, in a place I had spent 3 decades pretending did not exist, I already knew whose voice was going to be on it. I sat on the porch steps for a long time before I went inside. The mail carrier had already gone. The street was quiet, the way our street always is in the early afternoon. Just the sound of Mrs. Abernathy's sprinkler 2 houses down and a dog barking somewhere behind the fences. I turned the tape over in my hands. On the back, in the same blue ink, someone had written a single word: listen. I should tell you who I was, so you understand who I became. I grew up in this town. Everybody knew my father. He ran the hardware store on Main until his knees gave out, and he raised me to believe that the law was the closest thing a man could get to being fair in an unfair world. I believed him. I went to school on scholarships and loans. I came back home, and I spent my whole life on the bench in this county. People trusted me. They called me firm but decent. When I retired, they threw a dinner at the Elks Lodge and gave me a plaque that said, "Justice with Honor." And I stood up and cried a little, and everyone clapped, and I drove home feeling like a man who had spent his life on the right side of things. That plaque is still on my wall. I could not look at it. After the tape, my wife Eleanor passed 4 years ago. Cancer, the slow kind, the kind that gives you time to say goodbye and then takes so long that you almost resent the goodbye for how much it costs you. Since then, it has been just me in this house. Our daughter Kate lives 3 states away with 2 kids and a husband who travels, and she calls on Sundays, and that is the shape of my life now. Quiet mornings, the newspaper, a walk if my hip allows it. I had made a kind of peace with the smallness of it. I thought the loud part of my life was over. I was wrong. I found an old boombox in the garage, buried under a box of Eleanor's Christmas decorations. It had been Kate's, from when she was a teenager, and by some miracle, the batteries still had a little life in them. I brought it to the kitchen table. I set the tape inside. My thumb hovered over the play button for what felt like an hour. Then I pressed it. There was a hiss, a long stretch of nothing, and then a voice. "Judge Bennett, if you're hearing this, then either you're a better man than I gave you credit for, or somebody finally got tired of keeping a secret. My name is Daniel Reyes. You sentenced me to life without parole in the spring of 1991. I've been dead for 11 years now, so I suppose that makes this the strangest letter you'll ever get. Sit down. This is going to take a while." I did not sit down. I could not. I was already standing, one hand flat on the table to keep from falling, because I remembered that name the way you remember the name of the person who broke your heart. Daniel Reyes, 22 years old, case number that I could still recite in my sleep. A young man with a jaw like a boxer and eyes that never once looked away from me. Not during the testimony, not during the verdict, not when I read out the sentence and asked him if he had anything to say, and he stood up in that too big suit his mother had bought and said, quietly, "I didn't do it, Your Honor. I want you to remember that you're the one who let this happen." I had remembered. God help me, I had remembered every night for years, and then fewer nights, and then almost never, because that is what time does. It sands the edges off the things that should keep you awake. It lets you sleep. And that is the cruelest mercy there is. I want to tell you about that trial because the memory of it came back to me all at once, sitting in that kitchen, the way a smell can drag a whole year of your life up out of the ground. I remembered the courtroom in October of 1991. I remembered Melissa Cole's mother in the second row, a small woman in a gray coat who came every single day and never once made a sound, who just sat there with her hands folded and her eyes fixed on Daniel Reyes like she was trying to burn a hole through him. I built my whole sense of the case around that woman's grief. I told myself that giving her an answer, a name, a man to hate, was a kind of mercy. I did not stop to ask whether it was the right man. I only knew the town needed the wound closed, and I was the one holding the needle. And I remembered Daniel's mother, too, Rosa Reyes. She sat on the other side of the aisle, alone, because nobody in that town would sit with the mother of the accused. She wore the same church dress every day of that trial, and she prayed under her breath. And when the verdict came in, she did not scream. She just folded forward slowly, like a building coming down, and no one went to her. Two mothers in one room, both destroyed, and I had told myself I was serving justice by giving one of them her grief, and the other one nothing at all. I have thought about Rosa Reyes many times since. She died before her son did. She died still believing he might come home someday, which is the only mercy in the whole business, that she never lived to see how completely we had all failed him. The tape kept playing. "You probably think I hated you," Daniel said. "I did for a while, but hate is heavy, and where I ended up, you learn fast that you can't carry anything heavy for long. So I put it down. What I want to give you instead is the truth. Not because it'll help me, I'm past helping, but there's a girl out there who deserves her father's name cleaned up, and a woman who deserves to stop being the mother of a murderer. And you, Judge, you deserve to know exactly what you did. You've been sleeping fine for 30 years. That ends today." I turned the machine off. My chest hurt. I stood in my kitchen, 78 years old, and I understood that whatever I thought my life had been, it was about to be something else. Let me tell you about the case, the way I understood it back in 1991. Because you need to know the version I believed before you can understand the version that was true. A girl named Melissa Cole was found dead in the woods behind the old rail yard on a Tuesday morning in October. She was 19. She worked at the diner on Route 9, and she was putting herself through the community college, and everybody in town said she was going to be somebody. When they found her, the whole county went cold with grief, and then hot with the need for someone to blame. That is how these things go. Grief needs an address to send its rage. Daniel Reyes had been seen arguing with her outside the diner 3 days before. He had no alibi that anyone could confirm. His fingerprints were on a soda can found near the scene, though he swore he had thrown that can in a trash barrel by the diner a week earlier. And there was a witness, a man named Carl Duffy who lived in a trailer near the rail yard, who swore under oath that he had seen a young Hispanic man, matching Daniel's description, walking away from the woods that morning with blood on his shirt. The prosecutor was a sharp, ambitious man named Raymond Stoll. He was running for district attorney that year, and this case was his ladder. He built it fast, and he built it hard. The defense was a public defender named Anita Cruz, who had 11 other cases that month and no investigator and no money, and a client the whole town had already convicted in the newspaper. It was not a fair fight. But I did not see that then. I saw a courtroom that looked orderly. I saw evidence presented and objections ruled on, and a jury that deliberated for 6 hours before coming back with guilty on all counts. I saw the machine of justice working the way it was supposed to work, and I brought down my gavel, and I sent a 22-year-old man to prison for the rest of his natural life. And I went home, and I slept. That is the part I cannot forgive. Not that I was wrong. Any man can be wrong. It is that I was comfortable. I made myself turn the tape back on that night, after dark, with all the lights in the kitchen burning because I could not stand the shadows. Daniel's voice filled the room like he was sitting across the table from me. "Here's the first thing you got wrong, Judge, the soda can. Stoll's people said my prints were on it because I handled it near the body. But I told you where I threw that can, a trash barrel by the diner. Somebody took it out of that barrel and put it in those woods. You want to know who empties the barrels behind the diner? A kid who worked there part-time. A kid named Kevin Duffy. Carl Duffy's son. The same Carl Duffy who got up on your stand and swore he saw me with blood on my shirt." I felt something cold move through me. "I didn't know that at the trial," Daniel went on. "Anita didn't know it. Nobody dug because nobody paid anybody to dig. But I had 11 years inside, Judge, and 11 years is a long time to think about one October morning. And I had a friend. I'll get to him. First, I want you to sit with this. The witness who put me in those woods had a son who could have moved that can. And nobody, not the prosecutor, not the defense, not you on your high bench, ever asked a single question about it. I sat with it. Lord, I sat with it for a week. Because here's what a judge is supposed to be. Not a referee who keeps score. A last line. The person who is supposed to notice when the fight is rigged. And I had not noticed anything because noticing would have meant more work. And the case looked clean. And Raymond Stoll was a friend of mine, and everyone wanted it closed. I want to be honest with you here, and it is not flattering. When I heard about Carl Duffy's son, my first instinct was not grief for Daniel Reyes. My first instinct was to protect myself, to find a reason it did not matter. Maybe the can thing was a coincidence. Maybe Daniel made it up in prison, the way guilty men do, spinning stories to hold on to some scrap of innocence. I actually sat there and constructed defenses for my own conscience, like I was arguing emotion. That is the thing about guilt. It does not arrive as guilt. It arrives disguised as reasons. But I could not stop listening. The next part of the tape was recorded on a different day. You could tell because the hiss changed and Daniel's voice was rougher, tired, like he had been up a long time. "I need to tell you about Marcus," he said. Marcus was my cellmate for the last 6 years. Older guy, in for armed robbery, a lot of it. A real career, but the smartest man I ever met, inside or out. Marcus had been in and out of every prison in the state since he was 19, and he knew people the way a librarian knows books. And one night, maybe 5 years into knowing him, I told him my whole story. The girl, the can, Duffy, all of it. And Marcus got very quiet. And then he said a name. He said, "You ever hear of a man named Wade Sutter?" I stopped breathing, because I knew that name too. Wade Sutter had died in a car accident in 1996, 5 years after Daniel's trial. Drunk, alone, wrapped his truck around a bridge abutment on the county road. I remembered it because Wade Sutter was Raymond Stoll's brother-in-law. Stoll had married a Sutter girl, and Wade was her younger brother, a mean, drifting kind of man who had been in and out of trouble his whole short life. When he died, the town said it was a shame, but not a surprise. Marcus knew Wade Sutter from a stretch they did together in the 90s, Daniel's voice said. Different prison, before I ever met Marcus. And Marcus told me that Wade Sutter used to talk when he drank, and he drank all the time inside on Pruno. And one night Wade told a whole tier that he'd killed a girl back home, a girl in the woods by a rail yard, and that his sister's husband, a big-shot lawyer, had made the whole thing disappear onto some Mexican kid. Wade laughed about it, Marcus said. Laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world that somebody else was doing his time. The boombox clicked off. The tape had reached the end of the first side. I sat in my kitchen and I wept the way I had not wept since Eleanor died. Because I understood now that I had not just made a mistake. I had been a tool in another man's crime. Raymond Stoll had known. Raymond Stoll had built a case he knew was false to protect his wife's brother and to win an election. And I had lent him my robe and my gavel and my good name to do it. Every person in that county who trusted me, my father's name, the plaque that said "Justice with Honor," all of it had been used to bury an innocent man. And Daniel Reyes had figured it all out from inside a cell, with no lawyer and no freedom and no hope. And he had spent the last years of his life not planning revenge, but recording the truth onto a cassette tape, so that someday, somehow, it might reach me. I flipped the tape over. I needed to hear the rest. But my hands were shaking so badly I could not get it seated, and I had to stop and go stand at the sink and run cold water over my wrists until I could breathe again. The second side started with a different tone, softer, almost kind, which was the part I could not bear. "I'm not telling you this to destroy you, Judge," Daniel said. "I thought about that. Believe me, I had time to think about a lot of ways to hurt you. But hurting you doesn't bring Melissa's real killer to account, and it doesn't get my mother her son back, and it doesn't put my name right. So here's what I'm asking. I can't prove any of this from in here. But you can. You've got a name people trust. You've got years I don't have. You've got the whole machine that convicted me, and for once, it could work the other way. Marcus is still alive. He'll talk, if the right person asks. There are records. There's Kevin Duffy, who's a grown man now and maybe tired of carrying his father's lie. The truth is out there, Judge. It always was. Somebody just has to want to find it more than they want to be comfortable. You were comfortable once. I'm asking you to be brave now. It's the only thing you have left that I want." Then, at the very end, so quiet I had to lean in close to the speaker, "My daughter's name is Sophia. She was 2 when they took me. She's grown now. She thinks her father was a murderer because that's what the record says. And the record is your signature, Judge. If you do nothing else, if you're too old or too tired or too scared, at least find her. At least tell her the truth. Tell her her daddy loved her, and tell her he wasn't what they said. That's all. That's the whole thing. Goodbye, Judge Bennett. I hope you sleep as bad tonight as I did for 11 years, and then I hope you get up and do something about it. The tape ran out. The hiss played on for a while, and then it, too, went silent. I did not sleep. He got his wish. I sat at that table until the sky went gray in the window, and somewhere around dawn, I made a decision that I knew would cost me whatever peace I had left. I was going to find out if it was true, all of it. And if it was, I was going to burn my own good name to the ground to put it right. There was something else, and it is the hardest part of all of this to tell, because it is about Eleanor. A few days after I found the tape, I went up into the attic looking for the old case files. I had kept copies of my more difficult verdicts over the years in banker's boxes, a habit my clerk always said was morbid. I found the Reyes box under a window where the roof had leaked one winter, and when I opened it, tucked inside the front folder, there was an envelope in my wife's handwriting, my name on the front. Eleanor had been dead 4 years. I had gone through that attic a dozen times since the funeral. I had never seen it before, which meant she had put it somewhere she knew I would only look if I ever came back to this particular case. She knew me better than I knew myself, even from the grave. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping from 1996 about the death of a man named Wade Sutter in a car accident. On the paper, in Eleanor's careful teacher script, she had written only this: Harold, I overheard Ray Stoll say a thing at the Hendersons' party in '94 that I have never been able to forget, and never had the courage to tell you, because I knew what it would do to you, and I was a coward for your sake. If you are reading this, you already know. I am sorry I was quiet. I love the man you thought you were too much to risk him. Forgive me. E. I sat on the attic floor in the dust and the cold for a long time with that piece of paper. My wife had known. Not all of it, not the way I came to know it, but enough. She had heard Raymond Stoll say something at a party, drunk and loose the way powerful men get among their own, and she had understood what it meant, and she had spent the rest of her life carrying it silently because she could not bear to be the one who broke me. She had chosen my peace over a stranger's justice, exactly the way I had, only she at least had the decency to feel the weight of it, and to leave me a door out of the lie in case I was ever brave enough to walk through it. We had lain in the same bed for 30 years with a dead man between us, and I never knew. I do not blame her. How could I? I did the same thing, and I had far less love as my excuse. But it taught me something I have never been able to unlearn. Silence is not neutral. Silence has a body count. Every quiet, comfortable person who decides that speaking up is not their job is holding a corner of the same shovel I held. And most of them will go to their graves never knowing whose grave they helped to dig. That envelope was the moment I stopped being able to tell myself this was Daniel's crusade that I had merely inherited. It became mine. It had always been mine. I just had a lot of people around me, including the woman I loved most in the world, who had spent decades helping me not to see it. I went looking for Anita Cruz next, the public defender who had lost the case. I found her in a retirement community by the lake, sharp as ever at 76. And when I told her who I was and why I had come, she set down her coffee cup with a hand that trembled just slightly and said, "It took you 30 years." Not a question, an accusation, and a fair one. "I know," I said. "I told them," she said. "Do you remember? I stood in your courtroom and I said the investigation was a joke, that nobody had looked at anyone but my client, that the state had decided the answer before it asked the question. And you overruled me every time, in that patient, reasonable voice, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Do you know what it does to a young lawyer, Judge? To know the truth and to be treated like a nuisance for saying it. I left criminal defense 2 years after that trial. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stand in rooms where everyone had already decided and pretend that my voice mattered. You didn't just bury Daniel Reyes. You buried the part of me that believed the system could be argued with." She looked at me steadily. "So no, I'm not going to make you feel better about coming here. But I'll sign whatever you need me to sign. Because he deserved better than both of us. And I've waited 30 years for someone to finally do something about it." She signed everything. And before I left, she caught my sleeve and said, quieter, "For what it's worth, It's not nothing that you came. It's 30 years too late, and it won't bring him back, and I'm still angry at you. But it's not nothing. I have held on to that. It is the closest thing to absolution I think I have any right to. I want to tell you it was easy to begin. It was not. I was a 78-year-old man with a bad hip and no badge and no authority, and a whole town that thought of me as a kindly old retired judge who fed the birds. But I had one thing Daniel had counted on. I knew how the machine worked, because I had run part of it for 31 years. And I knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak, because I had helped bury a few of them without ever knowing I was holding the shovel. I started with Marcus. It took me 2 weeks and 3 phone calls to find out that Daniel's old cellmate, Marcus Webb, had been paroled the year before and was living in a halfway house in the city, 90 miles south. I drove down on a Thursday. My hands hurt on the wheel the whole way. I had not driven that far alone since Eleanor got sick. Marcus Webb was a big man gone thin with age, sitting on a folding chair on the porch of a sagging house. And when I told him who I was, he laughed for a full minute. Not a happy laugh. Danny always said you'd come, he told me. I thought he was crazy. Man spends his whole sentence saying the judge who put him away is going to be the one to get him out. I told him, Danny, that's not how it works. And here you are. He shook his head. You're too late to help him. You know that. I know, I said. I'm not here for him. I'm here for the truth. Marcus looked at me a long time. Then he told me everything he had told Daniel, and more. About Wade Sutter on the tier, drunk on prison wine, bragging about a girl in the woods and a brother-in-law who fixed it. He told it the same way twice when I asked him to, which is how you know a man is not lying. The details did not shift. And at the end, he said something that stayed with me. Danny wasn't bitter at the end. That's the part nobody believes. Man had every right to be. But he used to say, if I let this make me into a monster, then they were right about me all along. So he stayed decent. Decent in a place that eats decent men alive. You want to know who the real crime was against? It wasn't just some dead girl in the woods, Judge. It was him. Every day for 11 years. And you signed off on it and went to your nice dinners. I did not defend myself. There was no defense. I thanked him and I drove home in the dark and I pulled over twice because I could not see the road through my own eyes. Next was Kevin Duffy. He was 51 now, running a small engine repair shop out past the county line. And when I walked in, he did not know me, which was a mercy. I told him I was looking into an old case. I told him his father's name. And I watched a grown man's face come apart in real time. Because some lies are so heavy that the person carrying them is almost grateful when someone finally comes to take a corner of the weight. I was 17, Kevin said, sitting on an overturned bucket in the back of his shop, wiping his hands on a rag over and over, though they were already clean. My dad told me to move a can, a soda can, out of the barrel behind the diner into a bag and give it to a man he knew. Said it was nothing, said it was a favor, said there was $50 in it. I didn't know what it was for. I swear to God I didn't know until the trial, and by then my dad told me if I said one word he'd go to prison, and I'd have put him there, and it'd be my fault our family fell apart. So I kept my mouth shut. I was a kid. I kept my mouth shut and a man died in prison for it, and I have thought about it every single day of my life. He started to cry. This big, gray, calloused man crying on a bucket in a shop that smelled of gasoline. Would you say it now? I asked him. On the record, in front of people who mattered? He looked up at me. Who are you, really? I'm the judge who sentenced him, I said, and I'm trying to fix it before I die. Kevin Duffy wiped his face and stood up and put out his hand, and I shook it, and he said, then yes. God help me. Yes, I'll say all of it. I will not pretend the rest was simple. It was not. It took 8 months. I hired a lawyer, a young, sharp one named Priya Anand, who took the case for almost nothing when she understood what it was. And she did the work I no longer had the standing to do. We tracked down the trial records. We found that the soda can evidence had been logged into the property room by a deputy who happened to be married to a Sutter cousin. We found that Carl Duffy had been paid off in the form of a job he was suddenly mysteriously qualified for 2 weeks after the trial. We found a retired detective dying of emphysema in a nursing home who had been kept off the case back in 1991 for asking too many questions about Wade Sutter and who signed a sworn statement from his hospital bed because he said he wanted to die with it off his chest. I went to see Raymond Stoll myself once, before any of it became public. I owed him nothing, but I owed myself the chance to look him in the eye. He received me in his study like an old friend, poured 2 glasses of bourbon I did not touch, and for a while, we talked about the old days, the dinners, the men we had both known who were gone now. Then I set the cassette tape on the table between us, and I watched him understand. He did not deny it. That is the thing I was not prepared for. I had spent my life watching guilty men construct their innocence, and I expected Raymond Stoll, of all people, to be the finest craftsman of them all. Instead, he looked at that tape, and then he looked at me, and he smiled a small, tired smile and said, "You had 30 years of peace, Harold, same as me. Why would you throw it away now, for a dead man who can't thank you, and a town that won't either?" "Because it's true," I said, "and because I finally can't stand it." "Truth," he said, like the word amused him. "You were a good judge, Harold, but you never understood the job. Our job was never truth. It was order. People needed that girl's death to mean something, to have a villain and an ending. I gave them that. I gave the whole county the ability to sleep at night. You think that's nothing? You think Daniel Reyes was worth more than 1,000 people's peace?" He leaned forward. "You signed it too. You were happy to. Don't you dare come into my house and pretend your hands are clean." And the terrible thing is, he was right about that last part, and we both knew it. The difference between us, the only difference, was that I had finally decided my clean hands were worth less than one man's name. He never would. He had built a life on the arithmetic that some people are expendable, and he was going to die inside that arithmetic, comfortable to the end. I stood up and left the bourbon and took the tape off the table. At the door, I turned around. "You said our job was order, Ray, but you were wrong about what kind. A judge isn't there to keep the peace. He's there to be the last person in the room who's still willing to be unpopular. I forgot that for 31 years. You never knew it at all." He didn't answer. It was the last time we ever spoke. Raymond Stoll was still alive. 84 now, a retired district attorney, a pillar of the community, a wing of the courthouse named after him. When Priya and I brought the petition to reopen the case, he fought it with everything he had, and he had a great deal. Because men like Raymond Stoll spend their whole lives collecting favors for exactly this kind of afternoon. He called me a bitter old man chasing ghosts. He called it an insult to the memory of a murdered girl. He stood in front of the same courthouse where I had once presided, and he told the newspapers that I had lost my mind in my grief and my age. For a while, the town believed him. Do you understand? For a while, people I had known for 50 years looked at me like I was the crazy one. Because it is easier to believe that one old man went mad than to believe that everything you trusted was rotten from the beginning. That is the real reason innocent men stay convicted. Not because the truth is hidden. Because the truth is inconvenient, and a whole town would rather protect its own comfort than reopen its own wound. But I had spent 31 years learning how to build a case that could not be knocked down. And this time, I built it for the right man. Kevin Duffy testified. Marcus Webb testified. The dying detective's statement was read into the record. The property laws, the payoff, the family connections, all of it laid out in a line so straight that no amount of Raymond Stoll's money could bend it. And on a gray morning in March, 32 years after I'd sentenced Daniel Reyes to die in a cage for something he did not do, a judge who was not me, a young woman with a steady voice, vacated the conviction of Daniel Reyes and entered into the permanent record of the state that he was, and always had been, an innocent man. Raymond Stoll was indicted 2 months later. He did not live to see the trial. He died in his sleep in his big house on the hill, and I will be honest with you, I felt no satisfaction in it, because a man like that dying comfortable in his own bed is its own kind of injustice, and there was nothing left in me by then that believed the world balances its own books. It does not. It only balances the books we are willing to break ourselves open to balance. There was one thing left to do, the only thing Daniel had actually asked of me. Sophia Reyes was 34 years old and living 2 towns over, a nurse, a mother of a little boy of her own. Priya found her address. I did not send a lawyer. I did not send a letter. I drove there myself, on an April afternoon, with the cassette tape in my coat pocket, and I sat in my car in front of her house for the better part of an hour, trying to find the courage a decent man should have had 30 years earlier. When she opened the door, I saw her father in her face, the jaw, the eyes that did not look away. "My name is Harold Bennett," I said. "I'm the judge who sent your father to prison, and I've come to tell you the truth about him. He was innocent. I have proof, and I have something that belongs to you. It's his voice. He made it for you as much as for me, I think, and I've kept it long enough." She did not slam the door. She did not scream. She stood there for a long moment with her hand on the frame, and then she stepped back and said, in a voice so much like his it stopped my heart, "You'd better come in then." We sat in her kitchen, different town, another table with a cassette tape on it, and I played it for her from the beginning. And I watched a grown woman hear her father's voice for the first time since she was 2 years old. And I watched her hear him say her name, and say that he loved her, and say that he wasn't what they said. And I've seen a great deal in my life, but I have never seen anything like the sound she made. It was not a cry, it was 30 years of a wound finally being allowed to close. When it was over, she was quiet a long time. Then she looked at me and she said the thing I did not deserve and could not have earned. "He'd have wanted me to forgive you," she said. "He was better than all of us. He'd have wanted that." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I can yet, but I know that you came. My whole life, nobody came, and you came, so I'll try." I am 79 now. I have handed the plaque that says "Justice with Honor" to Sophia Reyes, because it belongs to her father more than it ever belonged to me, and she keeps it on a shelf where her son can see it. And she tells him it belonged to a good man who was lied about. And she is right, though she means Daniel, and I do not correct her. The county took Raymond Stoll's name off the courthouse wing. They have not put mine anywhere, and they never will. And that is exactly as it should be. People ask me, the few who still ask, why I did it. Why an old man would spend his last good years and every ounce of his reputation to reopen a wound that everyone else had let scar over. They expect me to say something noble. Justice, duty, the law. But that is not the truth. And I have made a promise to myself to stop being comfortable with anything but the truth. I did it because a dying man in a cell believed I could be better than I had been. He had no reason to believe it. I had given him every reason not to. But he recorded his voice onto a cassette tape, and he sent it out into the dark on the faith that somewhere on the other end, there was still a man who would listen. And when it finally reached me, 30 years too late to save him, I had exactly one chance to prove that his faith was not misplaced. That is the whole story. A retired judge found a cassette tape with his name on it, and it turned out to be the truth he had spent his whole life sleeping through. If you take anything from an old man who got almost everything wrong, take this. The most dangerous person in any room is not the liar. It is the honest man who has decided he has done enough. I was that man for 31 years, and it cost an innocent person everything. I keep the boombox in my kitchen now. I don't play the tape anymore. I don't need to. I know every word. But I keep it there where I can see it every morning, the way some men keep a cross or a photograph, so that I never again make the mistake of thinking that, because the courtroom looked orderly, justice was being done. So that I remember that a signature is not a small thing. So that I remember his name. Daniel Reyes, innocent. Say it, so that somebody does. My name is Harold Bennett. I was a judge for 31 years, and the most important verdict of my life came to me on a cassette tape from a man I had already helped to kill. I've spent my last years trying to be worthy of the second chance he had no reason to give me. I do not know if I have succeeded, but I know that I finally listened. And if you have someone in your own life whose truth you have been too comfortable to hear, I am begging you, from the far end of a long and mostly wasted life. Listen now, before it comes to you on a tape, 30 years too late.